It starts with how the FBI has reportedly opened a criminal leak investigation into a magazine report. And that reporter is Sarah Fitzpatrick of The Atlantic. And if that name sounds familiar, it's because last month she wrote a story where she cited more than 24 anonymous sources. Sources including people inside the Bureau, on the Hill, and the lobbying world, even people who'd worked in the hospitality industry around him, alleging that FBI Director Kash Patel has a drinking problem, has gone missing during work hours, and has on occasion been hard to wake up in the morning by his own security detail. And according to MS Now, the Bureau's insider threat unit out of Huntsville, Alabama is now running a leak probe. Right, and the part that has a lot of former DOJ people kind of raising their eyebrows is that the leak in question, it does not appear to involve actually classified information, which historically has been the bar before the federal government starts pulling a journalist's phone records and checking them out in bureau systems. But also, the FBI denies that this investigation even exists. So the Atlantic's editor-in-chief, Jeffrey Goldberg, said if it is true, it would be a, quote, outrageous, illegal, and dangerous attack on the free press. But what we do know for sure is that Patel sued the Atlantic for over $250 million just 2 weeks ago. Though almost every legal expert who's taken a look at it says that he's definitely going to lose this case. With the Nation calling it a giant cell phone. There are typos in this complaint that have become memes online. And while we're also going to dive into winning this case, probably not actually being the point, I wanted to dive into the one reason that it's even possible for the Atlantic to walk away from this. Because at the center of this, you have a Supreme Court case from 1964 that 2 current sitting Supreme Court justices have seemingly publicly said that they want to overturn. And there are organized, well-funded efforts that are still going on right now that are going to give them a chance. And a lot of this, it's connected to how Patel in his lawsuit said that the Atlantic published a, quote, sweeping, malicious, and defamatory hit piece. And then, specifically going after 17 statements in the article, including the claims about drinking at private clubs in DC and Las Vegas, alleged inability to perform his duties, and being just a national security risk. And Patel, he has a very high bar to clear, because when you are a public figure, a politician, a celebrity, a high-ranking government official, when you sue a journalist for defamation, they don't just have to prove that the story was wrong. They have to prove what the law calls actual malice. And that doesn't mean like the reporter was mean to them. That is a specific legal term. It means the reporter either knew that the story was false when they published it, or that they had what's called a reckless disregard for whether it was true. And that's a really hard thing to prove, right? Because essentially, to win, you have to get inside of the reporter's head and prove that they didn't believe what they were writing. And actually, one of the ways we've seen this play out was with Sarah Palin. Sarah Palin lost her case against the New York Times, right? Because the Times, they actually ran a false editorial connecting her to a mass shooting. The editor who oversaw it testified in court that yes, he made a mistake, and yes, he tried to fix it as fast as he could. And so the court said, oh, okay, well, that's a mistake. That's not malice. Palin loses. And it's also why you had Fox News paying Dominion $787.5 million. Or because in Discovery, internal Fox text came out where on-air talent and executives were privately admitting that they thought the election fraud claims that they were broadcasting on air were nonsense. That is a textbook case of actual malice. They knew it and they aired it anyway. And so with that, going back to Patel, he's claiming actual malice. And his main arguments are the Atlantic gave the FBI less than 2 hours to respond before publication, they buried the FBI's denial, and they later edited the headline. None of that is even close to actual malice, right? 2-hour response windows are aggressive but legal. Burying a denial in your eyes, that's not the same as ignoring evidence. And most importantly, the reporter cited more than 24 sources. The whole structure of this story is like people who know this guy are worried about him. That is not a claim that the reporter is making about Patel personally. It is a report on what colleagues are reportedly saying. And also, speaking to that many people on a story is pretty much the opposite of recklessly disregarding the truth. And so again, most people, including a number of commentators on the right, they think that Patel is going to lose, but the winning might not even be the goal. Right? The lawsuit, the legal fees that come with it, the hours that the Atlantic's lawyers and reporters are having to spend pulling documents for Discovery instead of doing journalism, the chilling effect it might have on others that have the audacity to report news on the administration. That's probably the goal. There's even a name for it. People who study press freedom call it lawfare, right? Using the legal system just to make it expensive to do journalism. And it works whether you win the case or not, but though really, the only reason it doesn't work even better is because of a Supreme Court case. Because in 1964, you have the New York Times v. Sullivan. And if you're not familiar with this case, that's normal. Most people kind of go, oh, the thing with the actual malice, and they point backwards vaguely. But it's very interesting to dive into, right? Because in 1960, Martin Luther King Jr. had been arrested in Alabama on what most historians consider trumped up tax fraud charges. And so a group of his supporters, they bought a full-page ad in the New York Times asking for donations for his legal defense. And when the ad ran, it accused Alabama police and various officials of brutality and harassment of civil rights protesters. But the ad, it had some factual errors, where things like it got the number of times that King had been arrested wrong. It said that the protesters sang one song when they actually sang a different one. And while the Montgomery, Alabama police commissioner, a guy by the name of L.B. Sullivan, wasn't named in the ad, he wasn't described in the ad, he sued the Times anyway, claiming that any criticism of the police implicitly meant him. And the setup of this trial, it was wild. But it happened in Montgomery. The judge, this is insane. But the day before the trial, reenacting the swearing in of Jefferson Davis as the president of the Confederacy, and some of the people who showed up in that courtroom were even wearing Confederate uniforms. And the jury, unsurprisingly, was all white, all mail, and they awarded Sullivan $500,000, which in today's money is roughly $5 million. Right? And this wasn't like some random outlier thing. Officials all across the South, they had figured out that you could weaponize libel law to try to bankrupt any northern newspaper that sent reporters down to cover the civil rights movement. By 1961, the Times alone was facing more than $6 million in libel claims over its civil rights coverage. You had the legal director saying that those lawsuits nearly bankrupted them. But also, when you add up all the northern papers that were covering the movement, the total ran to nearly $300 million in libel claims, and that's in 1960s dollars. But then what you see is the Supreme Court takes up this case, and in March of 1964, they ruled unanimously, right, 9-0, that this whole approach was unconstitutional. And it's there that the actual malice standard comes from, right? The Supreme Court said that if you are a public official and you want to sue a newspaper for defamation, you have to prove that the newspaper either knew the story was false or recklessly disregarded the truth. And then, 3 years later in 1967, they extended the rule to public figures in general, so celebrities, business leaders, anyone who's voluntarily in public life. And their reasoning was, if the threat of a libel suit is just hanging over every reporter who might criticize a powerful person, no one's ever going to criticize them. The potential cost of being wrong, it's just too high. And a press that can't criticize the powerful, that's not a free press, that's just PR. And so it's actually this ruling that's been holding up press freedom in this country for 62 years. But that also makes it a ruling that a number of people want to take down. And like I said at the beginning, there is an organized, well-funded legal effort going on right now to find the right Supreme Court case that lets them overturn New York Times v. Sullivan. And as far as where some of the potential votes come from, you're not going to be surprised by at least one of the names. Justice Clarence Thomas has written publicly starting in 2019 that he believes Sullivan was wrongly decided. He's argued that it lets the press make false statements about public figures with, quote, near impunity. Also, Neil Gorsuch might be there as well, right? Because Gorsuch joined Thomas in a 2021 case, though his angle, I will say, is different. Because Gorsuch's argument is basically that the media landscape that Sullivan was decided in doesn't exist anymore. That was 1964. There were 3 networks, a handful of major papers with actual fact-checking departments. And in 2026, there's Twitter, AI-generated misinformation, 12,000 random YouTube channels, also high. So he appears to think that the standard that made sense for the New York Times in 1964 might not make sense for whatever this is. Now, 2 votes, that obviously doesn't get you there to changing precedent. You have to have 5. But 1, we don't know where a number of the other conservative justices would stand on this. And 2, a lot of this might depend on the case that they use as a vehicle. So with that, I'll note that you had Steve Wynn, the casino owner, asking the court last February to overturn Sullivan as part of a defamation suit against the Associated Press. So with that one, the Supreme Court refused to take that up in March of 2025. Also, you have Coral Ridge Ministries, a Christian organization that sued the Southern Poverty Law Center for being put on a hate group list. They also tried. And there, the court actually asked SPLC to file a response to that petition, even though SPLC had already won at the lower court level. And so that one could actually be a small but very real sign. And actually right now, there's a pending petition from Alan Dershowitz against CNN. And that one specifically asked the court to consider whether the actual malice standard should be discarded, quote, altogether, or at least as private citizens who are public figures. And there, we'll find out later this spring whether the court takes it up. And that's while we've seen some state activity as well. Or with Florida being the most active example, spending recent years actively introducing bills basically engineered to be Sullivan vehicles. Laws that appear to conflict with the actual malice standard in ways designed to force a federal court to say which one wins. But for now, I'll kind of leave it with 2 last things. The standard right now, what Sullivan set up, it is currently working as designed. Well, understandably, the settlements, they get a lot of press. Trump himself has been losing his own defamation suit against CNN over the phrase, the big lie, and he's been losing it on actual malice grounds. But also 2, Sullivan is not invincible. Democrats often think in days and quarterly cycles. Republicans think in decades. There has been, is, and will continue to be a steady push of well-funded petitions specifically engineered to try and fight against this thing. And that's as this Patel lawsuit is a prime example of even trying to win might not be the point. If you make actual journalism expensive, slow, exhausting, scary, maybe stories in the future don't get done. And ultimately, I wanted to dive through all this with you because I think it's worth understanding, what we have and how we got it before we have to find out what happens when we don't. But hopefully, we won't have to find out soon.